Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to today's podcast. We have a very special guest today with us. I say we, but like my partner in crime is missing today again because he's off to shoot something. But, anyways, I get to ask all the interesting questions to our guest. He's film critic and he's written for The Telegraph, The Guardian, The Reader's Digest. He has a blog which somehow he manages to keep in the shadows. I don't know why. It's a great blog. It's called Synesthesia, and this is Mike McCahill. If you don't know him, you should definitely go follow him on. We link all the social media platforms in the description, but definitely check out his blog. I think I don't know why he's kept it hidden, but. Yes, Mike, go ahead. Please introduce
Hello,
yourself better than I
thank you
have.
so much. Thank you for having me. In terms of the blog, it's one of those things that I just end up, if I see something, but I don't get to, if I'm not being paid to write about it, generally it ends up on the blog. I mean, obviously all the work ends up there somewhere down the line, but it's just something I do to keep myself busy and out of trouble. And it's somehow become a thing. So people go there.
Yeah, because I mean, I have a blog. I say blog, but like I just keep it to like put stuff like once in a while. But like when I visited your blog, it was so detailed and so like regular. I was like, why is Mike not like publicizing it more?
It's been 11 years now. So I started in 2010, and I think there were people who were saying, oh, why don't you have a place online where you can find all your stuff or whatever? And I thought, well, I'll start it. And, inevitably there's a voice in the back of your mind that says this will be dead and buried within 2 weeks. No, there'll be tumbleweeds blowing through that. And yet somehow it's sort of, and I guess one of the things, the more stuff you post on a blog, the more people tend to discover it because of the wonderful world of search engines and how those algorithms work. So it's been a good sort of, like I say, it keeps me busy, it keeps me out of trouble on days when I don't have anything better to do.
Yeah, no, I think I've always said this. I think but like to me, at least, as someone who wants to be sort of go into the similar sort of film reviewing and sort of critiquing stuff, I think it does take like motivation, I think, to just sit down and write. And I think it's not just stuff, because I was going extensively through your blog recently, but because I discovered it myself very recently, so it's very detailed, like at least for someone like me who reads it, and nowadays you're kind of used to like really like the sort of tweet meme sort of culture where you get very easy sort of responses. Yours is like very detailed, and so which is what I think is like admirable more than anything else.
Well, thank you.
Yeah,
thank you.
I have to be nice also as part of like one of the people hosting it. No, I genuinely mean it. Yeah, but so so my sort of introduction to Mike was a lot to do with Indian cinema, and how he was one of the few writers who I always had like this knack of wanting to check what people outside of India actually think of Indian cinema, and more so even like Bollywood cinema. And I think UK has like a fair bit of a Indian contingent, of course, and I think they release weekly stuff in almost all big cinema chains, I think, from whatever
before lockdown, before the germs blew into town, it was, we would get the big films day and day with India, so we could write on them over here in the same way that you could over there.
So it was more but I'm guessing you still didn't have press screenings for those films.
So well, I mean, here's how I got into it. It's just that I started getting into criticism at the time when press screenings started for Indian films, and I happened to be writing for The Scotsman, which is Scotland's national newspaper, and there is a much bigger Asian contingent north of the border. I mean, there's a big Asian contingent anywhere you look, but there's a particularly big Asian contingent in cities like Edinburgh and Glasgow. And so my editors up in Scotland said, well, look, if there are screenings of Indian films, go and see them, we'll cover them. And so the Scotsman became the first sort of national newspaper in the UK to cover Indian films on a weekly basis.
Okay.
So it was a complete fluke of timing.
Okay.
That I just started out. I just moved down to London,
Yeah.
and Eros, the big distributor,
Yeah.
they'd started putting on press screenings, because the situation here has always been that press screenings are held on a Monday and a Tuesday for the films that come out on a Friday. And by and large, you get 3 or 4 films a day on the Monday and Tuesday. So it was always quite tough to squeeze in anything extra. You would get the big Hollywood blockbuster in the morning at a cinema in Leicester Square. You get the small art house and indie movies in the afternoon and a smaller screening room around the corner. But there's always been this sort of logistical issue where it was very hard to squeeze in anything that's 2.5 hours long. And also I think that from the critical perspective, the critics were just we've always been aware of Indian cinema. It's obviously a huge industry, a huge business, and has excuse me, has permeated the culture in so many different ways. But I think certainly in the West, there has been a kind of reluctance on the part of film critics to write substantially about it.
This is
because we're not sort of brought up on it. I think that's the thing. We feel much more confident writing about English language cinema, Hollywood, British period dramas. That's the kind of stuff that I was raised on. And I think there have been 1 or 2 critics before me who have written about Indian cinema in great depth, and but certainly in terms of the major national newspapers, there's been very little coverage over the years, and it just so happened that I was in the right place at the right time. And so I started writing for the Scotsman. That was 2003, 2004, 2005. So it was things like No Smoking and Main Who Na. They were the first sort of press screenings that I went to. There was a press screening of, I think it was, I can't remember what it was. So there's a film with Amitabh Bachchan and Om Puri. Does that ring a bell with you?
Is that Dave, maybe?
Yes, it was Dev. Yes, okay, exactly. It was Dev.
Yeah.
And we all turned up, and it was a week where there weren't many films coming out. So a lot of the big national press critics had turned out for this, thinking, well, I've got space to fill. I'm going to come and review this film. And we all sort of piled into this tiny screening room, and they put the film on. And within the first 3 minutes, we all sat there going, there's no subtitles on this film. So almost immediately, like 50 to 75% of the critics left because they just had no way around. What was really great is that the India, because there's a specialist Indian press here in the UK, and they've always covered Indian films, whatever. So their representatives have turned up, and they were sort of translating the film to us as we
while you were watching.
Exactly. It was like a sort of input. They have sometimes screenings with like signing for the deaf or something. We were in that position. Someone was interpreting the film to us as we went along. So that was an experience. And so in the early days, it was a bit sort of rough and bumpy, and there were press screenings that were scheduled and then had to be postponed or cancelled because the print didn't come into the country in time, or it was at the censors being marked for censorship or whatever. But now there are now, I mean, obviously the last 2 years has changed everything, but there have been press screenings now on a regular basis for a good 10 to 15 years.
No, I think do you remember what the first thing you watched, or like the thing that made an impact, or like was like, oh, this is Bollywood cinema, sort of like that?
Well, I'd seen Indian films before that. I think the first film that I saw as a teenager, because we have on our TV channels, we have Channel 4, which is like the sort of independent channel. It's not the BBC, it's not ITV, the commercial alternative. So Channel 4 would always show foreign films in the middle of the night. And I, because I was a film obsessed geek back in my teenage years, I used to record a lot of them on a VHS, with VHS tapes. That's how old I am. And they played Roja, the Mani Ratnam film. So they play that in the middle of the night. There's a brilliant woman called my memory has gone completely blank. But Nasreen Moni Kabir, that's her name. Sorry,
Okay.
again, my age is telling my memories.
Nah,
Nasreen Moni Kabir, who is
yeah.
a genius and has programmed films on Channel 4 in the middle of the night for,
Mhm.
25, 30 years, possibly
Yeah.
even before that. And she every year she picks a bunch of 6 to 10 films that represent Indian cinema, not just Bollywood mainstream, but South Asian
So yeah.
and South Indian films as well.
Mhm.
And yeah, so they were kind of like little training grounds. So, I mean, I wasn't
Yeah.
entirely aware of Bollywood as a concept. It was just
Yeah.
a foreign movie that was on TV in the middle of the
Yeah.
night that I happened to record and watched.
Yeah.
So I think that is the first Indian film that I saw. The first one I saw in cinemas was Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gam.
Oh wow, what an introduction. I mean,
my girlfriend at the time was going to see it with her family.
Yeah.
Because so I don't know what the situation was in India, but certainly here opened on the same weekend as the first Harry Potter movie.
Wow.
So just before Christmas 2001, it would have been, I think, if my memory serves. And we've already established my memory is not as good as it once used to be. But so because Harry Potter kind of dominated multiplex cinemas that week, it was on in like 5 or 6 screens of a 10-screen cinema. There was very little else to show on the other screens. And so Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gam came in and played on, at least 2 of the other screens. And so that was the first Indian film that I was aware of that made the UK top 5. I believe there were a couple before it, but certainly the first one I remember going top 5 in the UK. And I happened to have a conversation with my girlfriend, and I said, "What is this film?" She said, "Oh, my family's going to see it at the weekend. Let's go." And so I went along and said it was like a proper.
Was it subtitled or no?
It was subtitled.
Yeah.
Yes, I didn't need anyone to explain it to me.
See, I'm one of the few people who one of the few people from the podcast maybe who still harbors like a special love for Karan Johar films from that era also, except maybe Kuch Kuch Hota Hai is something dubious, I think. But
this is the thing. I mean, I always tell people that was my first sort of Indian film in a cinema, and it's either a sort of ecstatic reaction or, oh my god, how on earth did you keep coming back after that? And then, it is kind of everything you want from a big Bollywood blockbuster. It's all the stars. It's thunder and lightning. It is melodrama cranked up to 11. And I remember just sitting there among the audience who were eating sweets or whatever and clapping and cheering and booing at various points. It was like being in a single screen out in India, and it was a properly memorable experience. Whatever the strengths and weaknesses of that film, I quite enjoy that film. And whenever I've seen it on TV, I sort of duck in and watch
it's a similar sort of feeling. I think again it's not like my foundational film and like whatever, like I was too young I think then to sort of clock that I was into cinema, but like it taps into something very much into sort of, and I'm sort of in the process of becoming a sort of NRI also, so it was a very sort of NRI centric Bollywood film. So I think that sort of taps into me even now. I have not revisited it for like the longest time, but yeah, I'm always skeptical about revisiting.
But this is the thing with movies, is that they become milestones for moments in our life, and I think it's the same as if I'd said to someone around here that my first film in a cinema was Titanic. They would know exactly where they were when that movie came out. It was just so big and so everywhere. And again, I think that's another film where you either get people who are really, really into it, or people who go, "Oh my god, why did you ever go back to a cinema after that?"
No, I think it's, but I think that's very much a sort of reaction to mainstream, like popular cinema, I think in general, which is, I think a little scorned upon a little too much than it should be. Which, I mean, we'll get to that hopefully later. But yeah, so was there like any time where was it like so I guess the bigger question was like, was it a conscious decision on your part to go into Indian cinema because it was also something that was underexplored, and like maybe you could also create like an own sort of niche for writing about it and etc., so stuff like that?
I think it's certainly, when I started writing for The Scotsman, it was just, here's something that nobody else is doing. and it's something that I can offer. But I think once I started writing for them, I sort of became aware that I need to do a fair bit of homework here, because I haven't grown up with this cinema. It's not in my blood. It's not in my DNA. But I have that reaction to any kind of national cinema where I don't really know enough about the directors or the industry or the system or whatever. There's always, and this, even today, 20 odd years on, I'm aware of the sort of black holes in my knowledge that need filling in. So I did a fair bit of learning on the job, and this was sort of at a time where you were literally having to file copy on a film a couple of hours after having seen it. So it was all fairly frantic. It was like, being dragged around and, running into internet cafes with stacks of notes, you're trailing paper everywhere you go. But I did a fair bit of learning on the job. I did a fair bit of homework in my spare time. And then what happened was the Guardian decided to expand into, they were going to launch an Indian version of the Guardian at the very start of the last decade, sort of 2012, 2013, something like that. And that's when they asked me, they said, well, look, you've written about Indian films in the past. Would you like to be our sort of Indian film correspondent? And I said, wow, I mean, great, fantastic. And so that's how I ended up started writing about Indian films for The Guardian. And it has been, in all seriousness, it's been the one aspect of my work as a critic where I have had the most response to it. By and large, mostly positive. Every now and again, someone shouts at me in the comments or whatever. But
but that's firstly shocking that it's all been positive, because criticism generally just gets people riled up, I think, in general.
I think what I've found is that people, particularly in the UK, have they've looked at national newspapers and they've not seen themselves represented in any form whatsoever. These films, which are not, as I always say, they're not small art house movies going out on one screen in the back streets of London. They're playing up and down the country on 1,000 screens, the big films. And people are going to see them, and they're getting in the top 10 on a regular basis. These are films that people are seeing and talking about, and they want to have a conversation about them. And because the British print media has largely been the preserve of white men, it just hasn't happened. And I was the sort of fresh face. Believe me, this was once a fresh face, but I was lucky enough to be asked.
To be honest, Mike, I'm not going to reveal your age, but when I saw your birth year on your bio, I was like,
you can work in it. There's a lot of moisturizer and very little life experience. That's a good combination. That's my tip, my beauty tip for the podcast.
Okay. Fair enough. But I think but I think you're underestimating. I think because I think you are. So you reminded me well that the responses to some of the reviews you've written, I actually was going through one of the longer pieces, actually not longer, but like considerably longer piece was the one on Kumbalangi Nights, which you wrote for The Guardian. And I was looking through the responses, and a couple of responses were really lovely. And I was like, wow, people respond that well to like reviews and criticism. And I was like, I don't really see that nowadays in like, I think India is just a landmine for like abuse sometimes. But
I genuinely feel very lucky that people have embraced me, and it's not like I'm, God forbid, I'm setting myself out to be the know-it-all of Indian cinema, because I did not grow up with this, and so there are huge gaps in my knowledge that I've been attempting to fill in all these years. But in terms of opening up a conversation and being a bridge between one part of the world and another, I think that has been a really fulfilling part of my critical life in the last 10 years. And in terms of Kumbalangi Nights, people were amazed that The Guardian were covering a non-Hindi film, a film from one of the other regions. Because if Bollywood doesn't get covered, then the smaller films from the Telugu films or Tamil films certainly don't get covered. And so people were really, I think, genuinely quite amazed that the Guardian had actually gone out their way to cover. And but my line would always be, well, it's a great film. It's a good movie. Why would we not cover that? And if we don't cover the fault lies with us, not with those industries.
People. Yeah. Got it. No, I think so I'll get more into specifics because I was reading through I've read, it's not that I'm just doing homework. I've actually read Mike's work before also, and I really like it. And I've also encouraged him once to like share the link for his review of Dune on Letterboxd, though I would
the feedback was not always so positive on that one.
Okay, but that's part of you're going against the grain.
I guess
that's
so.
not a sound reference I could like.
Yes. Don't rattle the fanboys. Whatever you do, exactly. If I've learned anything in the 20 years of doing this, don't rattle the fanboys.
I was reading your review on Radhe, and I am shocked that no one. I mean, I guess the fans. I always think the fans for Salman Khan films are more Indian centric in any case, but I guess the one specific thing I wanted to get to when you approach sort of Indian cinema is like, because you're writing for a UK centric audience, right? So what I had noticed in a number of sort of reviews you always have is the first paragraph is always a sort of intro to also where Bollywood cinema is at the moment. How sort of consciously do you have to like think about that, and like do you just keep tabs on it because of like news publications and all that, or do you like actively ask people around you, colleagues who sort of know stuff like that? So just
it's keeping eyes on. I mean, social media has made this so much easier in that I can now follow 50 odd great journalists from India and from around the world who are, and increasingly there's a number of journalists over here in the West who are covering Indian cinema in the kind of depth that I'm drawn to.
I think the Guardian has one correspondent who's Indian, right? If I'm not wrong.
I think so. Yeah, I think they've got a couple of people who sort of write quite regularly for them on developments within the industry itself. I don't know whether they're actually based out there or whether they're looking on from afar. But yeah, I mean, in terms of those reviews, I mean, I guess if you were being harsh, you would probably say, well, actually there's probably a feature in this, and I'm trying to sort of shoehorn a feature into a review by getting a kind of overview of the industry. But sometimes it is, there are some films that come along and you just think, well, it's worth taking a step back and looking at where we are and putting it in context. It's often the case, I think, sometimes where I don't actually have all that much to say about the film. So
well, I always like so there was like a number of contemporary releases where I was looking at, and I was just like, every time you kind of say something which is interesting about the industry, because when you're so ingrained in like watching Bollywood regularly, you kind of just not forget, but you don't address where we actually are. So it's always like refreshing to read it from someone else's perspective, that this is where we are as an industry. And which is why I was saying that you're undermining how well you actually written about them, because I think whenever I've read your stuff, it feels very much that you know the industry very well, or know the industry basics very well, at least. Like just I think it was which is the other film? I think it was Thalaivi by starring Kangana Ranaut, and there were a lot of very funny jobs you made on how it was a film more about Kangana Ranaut than it was about the actual person. And I think, again, I expect the news of Ranaut to travel far, like west also, but I don't expect it to be like integrated like you had. So I'm basically praising
that's the internet, blame the internet. Stuff happens, a butterfly flaps its wings in Mumbai and it comes around the world to London. Particularly in that case, it was interesting. The feedback on that review from readers was yes, a lot of people enjoyed reading that review. I mean, it's only 350 words. You don't I mean, back in the day when I was doing those weekly reviews, they were 500, 600 words. You could stretch your legs out and write about pretty much anything to do with the film and the industry at the time. In those 300 words, you kind of got to cut to the chase. But particularly in that case, because it's a biopic of a figure who's much better known out in India than she is over here.
Yeah.
You kind of have to cut to the chase. And I did get, there was a fair bit of pushback on the fact that I compared the politician to Margaret Thatcher. But, you say Margaret Thatcher to a British reader, they instantly know that, divisive figure, obviously had strengths, but on weaknesses and polarizing, So it was kind of a shorthand for that. But yeah, sometimes you do kind of have to take shortcuts with those smaller reviews just to sort of put an image in your reader's mind that ideally you would like to several sentences to contextualize and finesse or whatever. In that case, it really was a sort of cut to the chase. Who is this woman? Why have they made a film about her? And in that case, the Kangana thing just leapt out at me. It was really a star rebranding herself or doing image management on the screen. And actually that's been one of the things that one of the ways into the Indian industry, just following the careers of stars, because
I was about to ask you on that.
One of the things that I kind of admire is that India still has a star system, for better and worse. Sometimes
I think people here will argue worse.
I've heard this often. But I still think there is some value in having some kind of star system, because we are drawn to the cinema to see extraordinary people doing larger than life things. Hollywood seems to have kind of turned its back on the star system in recent. It's much more about concepts,
superhero, right?
IP, or stuff that people know, brands and things like that. And I think a lot of really great movie stars have suffered for that in America. They're not getting the roles that they once did, and as audience members, we're not getting the kind of films that we want to see. Because once you grow above a certain age, you don't want to see people beating one another in lycra week in, week out. It gets very boring very quickly if you're not into that kind of stuff.
You're appealing to the good. You're appealing to our crowd, Mike. Because everyone
that's good. That's reassuring. But I'm also I'm rattling the fanboys as we speak. I can hear the rumble of their hooves.
You rattled them by saying Dune is bad. So that's fine, but it's fine. We've all had I've had a lot of films this year which I've just not been in sync with a lot of people, and I just find it very strange how, I'm not the biggest fan of Dune, even though I like Denis Villeneuve a fair bit, but Spencer really didn't work for me. We have an episode on it, and I won't speak more about it because everyone's kind of tired of me rattling about it. But you covered a lot of points. Actually, I was about to ask you about the star system, and because I think the other review I was reading that was very interesting was Gulabo Sitabo, which is a film that didn't work for you at all. So it was, I think you had mentioned that the stars are rendered absolutely aloof here, or made to look not sort of the big personalities. But you also said that the characters they weren't interesting. So I was going to ask you about the stars, sort of, if you go into a film wanting to actually see the sort of star power that that I think people in India now are basically we don't want that, which is strange. I think India in general, from whatever we've come to sort of see from the last year, and we referenced your review of Sher Shah, and that's another film which has been a completely sort of, we've used it as a punching bag throughout the year. But I think the idea that stars need to do something different is kind of prevalent here, whereas sort of, again, from the outside looking in, I think you kind of do like the whole element of the star, right?
Yeah, I like it when stars are sort of playing with their own personality, if you like. And I, actually, weirdly, I sort of all the Khans, I did warm briefly to Salman in that sort of mid-teens period, the sort of Bajrangi Bhaijaan, period, where he was, again, it was him rebranding himself after sort of off-screen tragedy and chaos. But there was a tube light maybe went too far, I think. But the whole idea of stars communicating with their audience through the medium of film is kind of fascinating, and that sort of play of public persona versus private persona. And, SRK has been brilliant at this over the years. And I think, one of the real sadnesses of recent years is that kind of the audience, he seems to be still revered, SRK, but a large part of his audience seems to have drifted away because he's doing, when he does a fan, he seems to have sort of alienated a lot of people doing that.
I think fan received a decent I think Fan was one of the few films that was kind of not champion, but like at least appreciated by a lot of sort of mainstream critics also. But I think it just didn't work. And I think what as actually I'm a big Shah Rukh Khan fan myself, so for me it's fascinating to look at his, as you said, the whole public persona, private persona, like the sort of dichotomy between that is kind of fascinating to me. And maybe that's why I kind of, whichever film actually I see of him now, I recently watched like a 2008 film, and I was just like, every film with these stars is probably going to have that sort of tension between those two personalities, and I kind of enjoy watching that also, like much more so than what we kind of make nowadays sometimes. Like that's kind of for me stuck in the middle of being like too Western and too sort of Indian also. So it's a
right. Yeah. I can see
sort
that.
of.
I can see that.
Yeah.
I mean, the other big shit. I mean, we know we're talking about the Khans here, and Amir is another example. When he tried to sort of he has done in recent years much lighter role. I think, I'm thinking of him in Secret Superstar. I'm thinking of him in Thugs of Hindustan, which is a film that nobody liked apart from me. I think maybe three. I think three people liked Thugs of Hindustan that I'm aware of on Twitter. So there's a small minority, and I particularly enjoyed watching Amir in that because it's him sort of having fun in the middle of this massive edifice of a blockbuster that's just burning banknotes left, right, and center, and he just comes on a donkey and he's messing around. And actually, for me, that was the performance that I sort of wanted from Johnny Depp in the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. That's just the right amount of playful and knowing.
Yeah, Johnny Depp goes.
Depp is like sort of a pantomime dame, and I know people enjoy watching it. And at least in the first movie, by the time we get to Pirates of the Caribbean 36, it was a different matter. But so again, Amir just sort of gently playing with audience perceptions and having fun, amusing himself, and thereby amusing us. I'm totally down for that. But the big shift in recent years has been away from those big male stars into the young actresses coming up, Deepika and Alia, and so that has kind of changed. I mean, the other big, actually, the one movie that I did when in that sort of prime period when I was reviewing week in, week out for The Guardian, where I do feel completely at odds with almost everybody else that I have a conversation with, it was Tamasha.
Okay, you didn't like it.
It's not that I didn't like it. It's just like I found it very sort of cold and alienating. And, there was a degree of game playing, which I got, but I didn't get much out of playing that particular game. And, while it was quite fun to see those stars sort of play multiple roles or different versions of the same character or whatever, I didn't get anything out of it particularly. It felt like a fairly empty intellectual exercise. And yet, I get people coming to me all the time saying, I love Tamasha. It means so much to me.
It's a cult following. It's good,
it's
proper cult following. Yeah, I think it's. I mean that director in particular. I don't know if you've seen more stuff from Imtiaz Ali, but he's I think one of the few sort of divisive / interesting. I say interesting because I'm divided on most of his work also. I really like Tamasha, but I also don't like a lot of his other stuff. So it's a very interesting. Again, so basically what people are going to take out of this podcast is that you like Thugs of Hindustan and you don't like Tamasha.
I will blow whatever tiny amount of credibility I have.
I mean,
I have fun with Thugs of Hindustan.
Which other film you had like fun with, which again I didn't watch because a lot of people just flat out said that was really bad, is Bell Bottoms, or Bell Bottom, is it? No, I'm not let's not make this a podcast where it's like Mike is wrong about like liking bell bottom, but it's more to do
I'm
with.
doing 25 other podcasts on that very theme this week. Well, I mean, this was an interesting one. This was one of the first movies that I went to see in a cinema after the UK opened up.
Yeah.
So I think, if I remember rightly, it went to streaming in India, or it did have a brief cinema run, and then everything closed down again, or whatever.
Yeah.
But this was sort of in the middle of last summer when the UK was opening up again, for better or worse. And yeah, it was one of the first things I saw on a screen. And I think a lot of films last year benefited from being a big film in a big cinema at the right time, and people just wanted to get back into a cinema and see that kind of filmy film, something that fills the screen, and it might not necessarily be the most highbrow, intellectually challenging thing. I do think I did sincerely think that Bell Bottom was well put together, and it kind of knew what the audience wanted for a sort of Friday, Saturday night popcorn movie. And Akshay, who is not really an actor I've really taken a huge amount of interest in. He's always kind of been there without sort of inspiring further thought on my part. I genuinely thought he was quite sort of dashing and sort of movie star like in that. He then went and made the cop movie with everybody in, which
Suryavanshi, right? Which
exactly, yes. And kind of blew whatever goodwill he had, whatever cool.
He's interesting. He's not a liked figure in India, I think. I mean, not amongst the cinephile community, just because of the nationalist sort of to most of his stuff. He's a little bit, again, it's just treading similar lines to, I think, Kangana Ranaut, in where like the film has kind of become jingoistic and a bit annoying, honestly. But
I also get the sense with him that this is where I betray that I have thought about him in probably more depth than he has about himself. But that he's just relentlessly working, and I think if you're doing that, then the sort of quality control will inevitably go up and down. It's the sort of the Rock kind of thing. Although the Rock is quite sort of consistent, if there's a 3-star movie to be made, the Rock will turn up in it. I guess more Nick Cave. Nick
Cage goes like big swings, right? So
Nick Cage is either that's very, very interesting or just appalling.
Fair enough. So I have one small other question, and then we can briefly move on to your favorites, because I want to discuss them, because we've never discussed them on the podcast, and I doubt we will ever, because I don't think anyone will see Memoria, apart from like a very select sort of
an elite
group, sure. But my other question, and I guess the last one, was more to do with, how do you approach like films now made by people about India and Indian subject matters, which are like British-based filmmakers making those films? So like Gurinder Chadha is one of them, I think, and I don't know, Meera Nair's, is she located in the UK?
She's in Canada now. She's North America.
So those are the two filmmakers that come to my mind. I'm sure there's more. Asif Kapari has never made a film on India, if I'm not wrong.
Isn't The Warrior the one with Irfan in his very first film?
Okay. I've not seen that.
I think that's sort of Rajasthan area. I think.
Yeah. So I'm only aware of his documentary stuff, which I really like. But well, like, have you seen stuff from the other two, who are the only two I can like sort of think?
I've seen most of Gurinda's stuff, and she's kind of a very mainstream, she will say this herself, she makes film for a certain mainstream audience, and she did the TV series which was a bit like Downton, but in India. She did the movie Viceroy's House, and then there was a TV series which was in a sort of similar vein. So she's very interested in that sort of colonial period. And that TV show went out at 9:00 on a Sunday night on ITV, which is very much the Downton Abbey slot. It's that sort of prestige period drama. So as she will say, she makes movies for that mainstream audience, and some of them come off and some of them don't. I mean, I did a on-stage retrospective with her a couple of years ago, and she's very frank about her work and the audience that she's going for. I like some of them more than I do others. I love, Bend It Like Beckham was another one of those sort of films that was sort of milestones for the audience. If you were a teenager and you saw that movie, it stayed with you and become a sort of cherished item. You've got the poster and the DVD, and you might even have started playing football because of it. So yeah, the Gurinder, it's very much in that vein. I didn't think very much of the Stephen Frears movie Victoria and Abdul when that came out, and actually Gurinder was at one point, she was down to direct that movie. I'm not sure whether maybe someone would have made a more interesting version of that film than Stephen Frears did. I mean, this is the problem right now. The British film industry is kind of stuck post Downton on the assumption that if you make anything anywhere around the world with posh people in fancy frocks, that's going to be a winner, and that's what we explore.
I mean,
that's what we do now.
I mean, the other version is the people in suits who are also posh and rich and sort of
there are a lot of posh people around. I mean, there always have been. Generally, that's kind of what we do, what we export, posh people, but it can be very damaging to our culture and our politics. I'm thinking of right now. I mean, this is the issue, is how flexible the British film industry is, and it hasn't been very flexible over the years. I think it's starting to loosen up a little bit, and there are new voices and new filmmakers coming through, which is a good sign. But it will take a while for those people to find their feet and to get established. And also, traditionally, we've been pretty lapsed, whereas the French film industry is now a million miles away from us. But if you're a young, up-and-coming filmmaker in France, you very easily get to make 2 or 3 films before someone sits down and go, well, they didn't work. You're never going to work for us again. Whereas I think in Britain, if you make a debut movie that doesn't find an audience or doesn't get particularly well reviewed, that's kind of it. Your funding is cut off, and you're cast out into the wilderness. So that's always been an issue with the British film industry.
Okay. So
may we start?
1, 2, 3, 4.
It's a weird thing because I rewatched Annette today because I didn't really connect with it the first time, even though I loved some parts of it a lot. The opening is one of my favorites of the year, maybe.
It's great, the opening scene,
and
even people who don't like Annette love the opening scene. And I think that people who don't like it, that's the sort of where the crashing disappointment sets in.
The time it ends, basically.
Once Adam Driver has sped off on his motorbike, that's kind of, they should just end the film there, and it would be a 5-star masterpiece.
So I think I watched that today. I rewatched it today, and I've been on a sort of Memoria trance for like a week. So I've not been able to actually watch other stuff properly, just because that film is kind of stuck in some part of my head. So the weird link I kind of found between them is that they're kind of about the depth of delusion, which is a quote unquote term used in Memoria. So it's a strange link that they have, like, because they're basically going in other extremes, right? One of them is going full sort of artifice and like maximalist, and then Memoria is the other way. But it's a weird like ground I found where I was like, this is very interesting how 2 filmmakers kind of approach this completely different material in a way where I've been thinking about that connection. But go ahead.
You're right. I think they are kind of yin and yang. And I think I responded to them because they were, such extremes. I mean, it has been a weird couple of months, a weird couple of years, but a particularly weird couple of months in terms of movie going, because I think this year's awards crop are kind of, they're not a terrible awards crop, but it's like, we've got stuff that was made like 3 years ago and sat on a shelf, and stuff that was sort of knocked off during the pandemic, and stuff that was delayed or whatever, and it's all kind of fairly middling. And here are 2 films that are just go so far beyond that kind of middling mass of awards movies. And so
are you saying that Belfast is not like experimental genius?
I think I should, adopt a diplomatic. As a British film critic, it doesn't behove me to comment any further on Sir Kenneth Branagh's Belfast. I'll be locked up in the Tower of London, and they'll throw away the key if I comment any more on that film. It's an odd one, and I saw them in very different circumstances. I saw Annette towards the end of last summer, when I was feeling a bit burnt out with life in general and cinema in particular. And I took myself away on holiday for a few days to Brighton, which is sort of south on the south coast, an hour away from London by train. And I had a really good sort of restorative few days just sort of lounging around on the beach in a sort of late September heat wave, which came out of nowhere. And one afternoon I thought, well, I've done enough lounging. I'm going to go into the Duke of York cinema, which is a lovely, lavish, old Art Deco cinema that they have down on the promenade, towards the promenade in Brighton, and catch up with Annette, which I hadn't seen. And I'd heard, people really, really loved it, and people were completely baffled by it and left cold by it. But, from that first scene, I was completely caught up in it. And it sort of did for me everything I wanted a big movie to do. And sometimes you just want a big movie, something that's just sort of overwhelming your senses and so sort of sweepingly romantic. And then, having come out of it in a kind of, on a high and skipping down, floating down to the beach again. I looked into what Leos Carax is actually writing about and the sort of autobiographical element to it, which is really tangled and very complicated. And if you know what he's writing about, it casts that film in a completely new light. But having absorbed all that and taken that on board, that's kind of what art should be. It should be sort of complicated and interesting. And one minute it can seduce you, and the next it can break your heart. And for me, I was completely blown away. It's almost like it sort of bypassed all my critical faculties. I'm very interested. It's only just come out on DVD here, so I'm going to pick up a copy and go back and have a look at it on small screens. And that traditionally has always been if it holds up on the small screen, it must be doing the fundamentals are all there.
I'm a big proponent of it should work on like any sort of medium.
I mean, I don't watch stuff on my phone, but if there's a DVD, I watch it on my laptop or whatever, and if it holds up on that format, then it's doing the basics right. So I'm very intrigued to go back and see it. But I mean,
it worked better for me on the second viewing, if that's any.
Good. Okay, well that's.
But then I was also not like totally converted in the first one. So,
right. You weren't swept. You weren't floating down.
I still am not swept away by it, because I think he does there's just minor things because he's doing a lot of things, right? And then the minor moments.
So Leos Carax has a lot on his mind.
I know,
and it's coming out in different ways and in ways.
I think the highs of it are like really, really they do reach that sort of soaring sort of crescendo sort of like that. But for me, there's like these couple asides which I just feel is like they just suck me out of it, and then it's basically like another sort of way of getting back in tune with it, so that sort of takes time. But Adam Driver is terrific. I think I mean he's been in I've seen 2 films of his. I like Annette, I like much more than Last Duel, but he's fantastic in Last Duel also, I think. So I'm surprised he's not like in the sort of awards talk or whatever.
I guess the commercial failure of Last Duel has sunk that in terms of an awards contender. But I mean, in terms of Annette, it's like a vaultingly ambitious performance. He has to be a stand-up comedian and a lover and a killer and a father, and there's a lot going on.
That's true. No, that film maybe we can probably do some episode on later. But the other one, just to end the episode on very promptly, is Memoria, right? So
which is it's completely the opposite. It's it's so quiet. It's so.
You watched it in the cinema?
No, so amazingly, because case numbers are still high. I mean, the cinemas are open around here. And in theory, you can go and watch Spider-Man: No Way Home or Scream or Nightmare Alley, the things that are out right now. And I'm hoping to get back. I'm still a little bit nervous about going and sitting in a room for upwards of 2 hours, So I'm being a bit cautious, and particularly around here, which is, so I live in the Midlands, which is, bang in that does what it says on the tin, bang in the middle of the UK. And by and large, we've had a fairly quiet pandemic in terms of case numbers and things like that. But Omicron has just scrambled the data on every level. So case numbers are really high around here, and I'm sort of a bit reluctant to go back out. So they sent me a screener link of Memoria, and I watched it on my laptop with headphones in, which I do think sort of enhanced the experience. You
Definitely
feel sort of locked into it. And I was just blown away. I think it has the most spectacular use of sound and sound design that I can certainly in living memory. I mean, it may well be the most extraordinary film to listen to. Full stop. I think it's, and I generally try and rein myself in and and not go to those extremes in terms of comparisons. But in terms of just how dynamic it sounds, that's always been a component of Weerasethukal work in the past, but never to this extent, where he's pushed the sound that much, and also made you aware of how much this is going to be about sound, from that very first first few minutes, and then Tilda goes to the recording studio, and then we have to sit there and listen to 5 minutes of sound coming through a recording desk.
That's the scene that actually made me link that and Annette, because that's the one scene in which the sort of
starts
artifice,
in the recording studio,
and the artifice comes into it there, and then I was like, okay, that kind of makes sense. But
I really, all the knobs are being pushed up to the max. If I can say that. No, I mean, I genuinely thought I thought Tilda Swinton, who was an actress who I'm broadly pro on, I think she's fascinating to watch. But in terms of just the last year, I've seen her in The French Dispatch, where she wears comedy teeth and she does that lecture, and it's clearly just Tilda mucking around, but quite funny. I've seen her in The Souvenir Part 2, the Joanna Hogg film, which is coming out.
Is that released there? I don't think it's
next week, which is really good. And I think having said so much negative things about the British film industry, Joanna Hogg and her two Souvenir films are really outstanding, I think. Where she's playing a sort of the posh mother of the heroine, and again a completely different characterization. And here I don't think Memoria would work anywhere near as well with any other actress in the role, because she is used like a lightning rod. Like I think I said in the review, it's one of those rare examples where you can see a director actually using an actor or an actress like a tool, like a recording instrument to pick stuff up on her face, when she reacts to that noise or whatever.
I only got reminded of Delphine Seyrig in like one of those films where the last year in Marienbad and John Dilleman, where the camera's at such a distance, and then you're just like watching.
It's all on the face. It's all on that extraordinarily expressive face. It's like looking at a Geiger counter or something. But I mean, Tilda is sort of almost so sort of translucent that you can kind of see the nerves twitching and whatever. It's genuinely fascinating to watch. So I mean, amazing sound design, but also extraordinary things to look at. I'm not. Again, I will go back and look at it. I think the ending, that final movement where things take off, I'm not entirely sold on that, but I was kind of willing to go along with on the ride. But getting there, I was just absolutely knocked out by it. And particularly at the end of what had been a pretty long and as I said, sort of fairly exhausting 12 months, where I was feeling burnt out, to suddenly sort of rediscover my love of movies when they're that good. That's been a real the last few weeks.
It's just I just love films which kind of lull you in one sort of mood, and I think I was also kind of looking for that. And if anyone is like, I know it's not an easy recommendation because it's slow, I guess, in that sense, but like if you're really sort of in the mood for something which is meditative, I don't know, that term's so overused.
No, that's
now,
exactly
but
what
but then I think that's like the film for you. And I mean, I'm thinking like I liked it the first time, but then subsequently I've seen it once, I've seen it twice, but like I really have just wanted to go back to it. So it's probably just gonna shoot up like wherever.
I think it's much more accessible than Uncle Boomy, which I think again is a really terrific film. But I think if you put someone down who'd never heard of Apichatpong Weerasethukal and then showed them Uncle Boomy, they would be, I mean, they might be amazed by it, but they'd be thrown by it in many places, and they might sort of snap out of it. Whereas Memoria, I think, teaches you from a very early stage how to watch it, how to look at it, how to listen to it. And I think those, those kind of films are really special, where the director is saying, okay, I'm going to do something different here. But if you go with me, I will show you what I'm doing, and it will take us somewhere along the way.
And I think it's also one of the few films, at least till a certain point, there is like an element of mystery and suspense, which is like very evident. Like you are actually like aware of how clear the
it's a quest narrative. It's a woman going on a quest to find out what this noise is and whether she's the only one that can hear it, and if whatever it is, she has to find it out. So it's kind of, it is a mystery, it is a bit of a detective story, and it has that sort of supernatural edge as well, I think. So it's possibly, in as much as this sounds like a very strange thing to say about an Apichatpong Weerasethukal film, it's his most accessible film, I think.
I mean, you made a Conjuring reference in your review, which was very. I never thought of it like that. It made sense.
I would be very intrigued to get a bunch load of popcorn, chowing teenagers in, and take their mobile phones at them and say, "You are going to watch this movie and see what you think." And I think they would respond to it in some way. It'd be an interesting social experiment.
I think you're generous in what you think people would respond to. But it was great talking to you, Mike. I think this was. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope I wasn't like grilling you about your love for
no, honestly, this has been really fun. Thank you so much for having me. I hope
it's been great. I mean, if ever we want to do something extra and like you are interested, I'll approach you, and we'd love to hear more from you. And again, I will be linking everything in the descriptions. I'll ask for Mike for his other social media accounts. I myself am only on like Instagram recently, so I'm like a hermit. So basically I have less knowledge about it. Anyways, but I will be linking everything in the description. Thank you for listening to this podcast. If you want more recommendations, if you want to sort of tell us what to watch and like review later, please do so. And
bang, and then it shrinks.